Okay, this is chapter one, part two. We left off last time talking about some of the definitional issues with mass murder. We're talking, we're talking about mass murder first, as opposed to serial murder, because most of the course is devoted to serial killers. And so the author, and I agree with the author, wanted to include at least some discussion of mass murderers as well. So um, we're covering those first, but don't worry, we'll get to the discussion of serial killers soon enough. And recall that in the last segment we were talking about Kehoe, and so let's where we can let's tie in his case with some of these general points that we're making here. Mass murders used to be thought of as occurring only in public places, but private domestic killings are typically now included. So you do get the Kehoe sort of crime. It's fairly common. I mean, mass murders is rare itself, but among mass murders, you do get the type that's a combination of domestic killings plus public killings, where you kill your own family members first, and then you go to another place and kill many more people. But you also have the type of mass murder which is limited only to family. And so you have the sort of violent person who kills all of his family members and often will kill himself too at the end of that, but not always. But it's one where you wipe out relatives, family members, people close to you, and that is included, not always, but included often by researchers because in these cases there are a lot of victims, deaths, injuries. It's just that it's not in public. In a private setting, but it's still, at least by some people, counted as a mass murder just purely because of the numbers, because a lot of people are killed or injured. Over half of all mass killings are domestic. So this is a pretty, among I'm not serial mass murderers, this is a pretty common scenario where you're taking out several family members. A troubled parent or sibling annihilates the entire family, sometimes followed by a suicide. And in the case of Kehoe, his is greater scale where he does that at home, but then he also takes it on the road and turns his violence towards non-family members as well. Killings that get more media coverage include shootings in schools, workplaces, malls, government offices, etc., with victims being shot randomly. Now, that's clearly the case. That's true. The reason why you don't know too many of these domestic killings, probably where families get destroyed, is that the media covers these killings that have a more random element. Now, ask yourself this question: why would that be? Why would the media cover this one sort of crime and not these domestic crimes, even though you may have just as many people killed or injured? Why is it that it's these public crimes that have this random component? Um, why are they covered so much? Think about that for a moment. I would suggest that the explanation is that these public killings create more fear in the public, because if some crazy disturbed person kills his family, well, that sort of person probably doesn't pose a risk to me because he had an issue with his family. But it's not some random sort of thing where he wants to kill me for some unknown reason. His violence was directed towards family, and so that gets people less frightened than a public more random sort of shooting gets people really frightened, because people are more likely to think, wow, that could happen to me and mine. I could be in a mall, or my child could be in a school or something. If it gets shot up, I could be hurt or killed, or my friends and family could be killed in that sort of a public killing. So I think that's what the media is responding to, the fear, to the interest of the public. And there's just more interest in fear and fascination with these public kind of random sort of crimes than the more private ones. According to the FBI, killing 4 or more persons at one time is considered to be a mass murder. So that's probably the one we should go with. You have different researchers who will set the cutoff at different points. Some people will say 6. Some people will say you don't have to kill 4 people. You only have to injure at least 4. Or, there's various definitions. That's always an issue. But since the FBI is sort of an authority here, we could go with that as being, kind of the main definition that you would see. Killing at least 4 people at one time, basically in one event. Now, Kehoe, you say, well, that's 2 different places, in the farm and the school. But, it's all basically within the same short time period, so that would be considered uh, like a mass murder. So you can sometimes have more than one location, but it's all got to be sort of one continuous crime to think of it as a mass murder. But that's how the FBI is thinking of it. These killings are actually a tiny fraction of all homicides in the United States. They get a lot of media attention nowadays, and they are very disturbing, and they are a big social problem. But keep in mind that as a, a total fraction of all homicides in the United States, they're just a tiny sliver. Roughly 1%. So the media coverage makes you think that a lot of people that are killed in the United States per year are killed by these mass shootings, mass murders. And these crimes have indeed been troubling the past few years in particular, but we still need to have perspective, because there's, say, 15 to 20,000 Americans murdered each year, but only you can't in a typical year you count your mass murderers in the dozens per year, or in possibly in the hundreds, but not in not 20,000, not anything like that. You might get a couple hundred mass killings if you add up all of them from a year, but they are a small part of our violence problem, numerically speaking. The death of anybody is unacceptable and a tragedy. But again, we're trying to understand patterns, and this is, comparatively speaking, a rare type of crime. Very troubling, but it is a rare type of crime. Now, a big list here. And it's good to go through these and know them. I'm not going to stress them too much, but researchers in this area have developed a typology that these killers are not all exactly the same. They don't all have the exactly the same sort of motivation. So let's take a look at some of these types. Number one, family slayer or annihilator. So we just talked about this one, these domestic killings. A person who kills his family, and often, not always, but often commits suicide. Sometimes they'll just wipe out the family and try to hide the crime and get away with it. And they want to continue living, but more commonly is that they're committing suicide and they're taking the family with them. Murder for profit. Now this is a kind of a different dynamic, right? This is your hitman, right? Different motivation. A guy who's cold-blooded killer who kills people for money, and maybe he's done it for 10, 20, 30 years. It's his job. It's his quote-unquote job, his quote-unquote career. That's a different kind of motivation. That's a somewhat different sort of, we have to understand that there's different motivations here. And normally when I think of mass killers, I'm not thinking of the hitman, because the dynamic there, the understanding of them is quite a bit different. We need to pay attention to them because they're out there. They're not common, but they're out there. Typically working for organized crime, that sort of thing. And they're good at killing people, and they get paid quite a bit to do it. Now you have murderer for sex. This is a person with a primary goal of sexually torturing, raping, and murdering his victims. This is a rare type. It's vast majority of these mass killings where you kill a whole bunch of people at one time. Vast majority of those don't have anything to do with sort of sexual stuff. I mean, it's very common motivation among serial killers, which we'll get to later. But that's not the motivation. I don't know the statistic, but 99% of the time, it's not some sort of, people getting some sort of sexual pleasure from killing a bunch of people. That's just not common. It's a rare type. Pseudo-commando, this is more common. A person with an obsession for guns and fantasy for murder. Well, here, yes, guns is a typical element among these killers, although as you saw with Andrew Kehoe, it doesn't have to be guns. It could be something else. It could be explosives, for example. But these guys, these pseudo commandos, that they tend to have sort of a mission, and then a little bit related to these later ones we'll talk about here, like the ideological mass murderer. These guys will sometimes be kind of on a mission to get revenge, to retaliate against a random bunch of people, but people who symbolize the enemy. And so you get this sort of retaliation, this maybe politics, extreme politics, revenge, that kind of motivation. And that person may be very skilled with guns, with weapons, may have some military background possibly. And so that's a certain type that you'll see. Set and run killer. This is a person who plans an escape route following the killings. You will see very often that these mass murderers do not plan what to do after their crimes. They'll plan a great deal sometimes when it comes to the crime, but what to do when the crime is over with. A lot of times they'll kill a bunch of people and then they'll act like they really don't know what to do, and they might just surrender to police, or they might kind of walk away and may get lucky and escape, but chances are they'll get caught because they don't even really seem to try to care if they escape. So it's a little bit of an unusual type, but one that you will see that actually plans to get away with the crimes. That's more the exception than the rule, actually, you see with these set and run killers. Psychotic killer, a person suffering from acute or chronic psychosis who is considered to be legally insane. So this is another type that's not very common with these mass killers, who suffers from, when we say psychosis, we're talking about being someone who's disconnected from reality. Maybe they have delusions where they imagine things that aren't true. They hear voices. They think that there's some famous person, or feel like they're inspired by the devil or God, somebody speaking to them and telling them to kill a bunch of people. So it's people who, this type is a person who's completely disconnected from reality and feels compelled to commit the crimes because of mental illness, false beliefs about things and fantasy, just imaginary beliefs about things. So that is not the most typical either. What you do see on this issue of mental illness is that much more common is that the people who commit these crimes are indeed suffering from mental problems, but it's not the psychosis where you're disconnected from reality. It's more depression, suicidal thoughts, a desire to kill yourself and take a bunch of people with you as sort of a revenge for your failed life, your unhappy life. So these people very often feel like failures, and all this, like Kehoe, all these bad things happen to you, and you think it's horrible what's happened to you, and you blame it on other people, who then you convince yourself they deserve to die as punishment for all the terrible things that they've done to you that have turned you into a failure, right? So that sort of psychological distorted thinking is common among these mass killers, but not to the point where they're completely disconnected from what's reality. These people tend to be pretty high functioning and are able to plan out these crimes. So yes, they have psychological problems, but not usually the quote unquote crazy types of people like you are maybe likely to think of. Now, disgruntled employees, that's a pretty common scenario, a type for a person who seeks revenge for real or imagined wrongs at the hands of coworkers or employees. We know that a lot of our negative interactions in life come with people that you're dealing with day in and day out. And one place where you deal with people a lot is at work. And if those relationships are negative, and if things go bad and you get fired, Um, some people take that really hard, and again, they blame it not on themselves, they'll blame it on the workplace, on their bosses, on their coworkers, and so they may go back to that workplace after they've been terminated and in an act of revenge and retaliation kill a bunch of employees from that workplace. That's a pretty common scenario. And if you're paying attention here, you'll see that one theme that's going to come out as we talk through these mass murderer types: revenge, retaliation, a desire for vengeance is a very common motivation for these sorts of crimes. Disciple type killer, a person who commits murder at the behest of a charismatic leader. So I think of someone like Charles Manson and his cult followers who went and killed people because he told them to. And so if you're under the sort of mental control of some cult leader, that can lead you to commit extreme acts that maybe you would just simply would not have done if you weren't under the dominance, the influence of some leader, some cult leader. So you do see cult killings, not common, but it certainly is there. It's a type. Related to that, again, is this ideological mass murder, a person, especially a cult leader, who is able to persuade others to kill themselves or each other. So again, the idea here is that if you get some really twisted pro-violent beliefs, whether it's kind of has a religious aspect to it or a political aspect to it, it's a belief system. And it's an extreme belief system because it embraces violence. And not only does it embrace violence, it embraces violence towards innocent, random bystanders, right? So you get these, in the extreme groups, you can get this sort of thinking that, again, it does tend to be tied in with vengeance and retaliation, that whatever group that we blame all our problems on, the group teaches you that violence is an appropriate way to get payback against your perceived enemy. So, oh, we hate this group of people. Say it's like America. If you want to get in a more terroristic direction, we hate Americans because they're the cause of our problems. So we're going to go kill a bunch of random Americans just because they're Americans, right? So that's ideological, and that's pretty common, fairly common motivation for this type of killing, is this distorted, twisted belief system that some people have. Institutional mass murder is a person who commits a mass murder as a crime of obedience when ordered by their leader. So again, that's like that disciple type killer, where you're under the control, under the influence of a leader, and it's, in this case, institutional. It's sort of the group is organized enough that you can think of it as being an institution. If it's less organized, then maybe it's more simple, the disciple type killer. But if the group that you're a part of is highly organized, then it might be more in this institutional direction. But the point is that you're doing it not so much because it's something that you would do on your own. You're doing it because you're under the control of this group, right? That's the idea there. Okay, and let's stop there. We'll continue part 3.